All right, assalamu alaikum everyone again, and welcome to tonight's talk. And today we have a very exciting talk, and it's not really the typical webinar. It's going to be a blend, and it's going to be an interview. It's really exciting. So let me start by introducing myself, whomever I haven't yet met you. My name is Reem Al-Jizawi. I am one of the co-reachers and the founder of Coexist. Coexist, in short, is the first coaching firm and a platform in Saudi Arabia. Been established for over 9 years now, alhamdulillah. We are a group of passionate and advocates for basically bringing the human elements back to work. We are both, as I said, firm and a platform, a firm where we collaborate and we serve the businesses to find their purpose and to bring them back to their human elements when they are working with each other in multiple different tools, and as a platform where we collaborate with the individuals to help them elevate their self-awareness and lead their way towards their personal and professional growth. Believing in the power of teams and psychological safety, we let go of our hierarchical system and turned Coexist into an agile team organization. We're becoming proudly the first company to adopt and implement a Holacracy management system in Saudi Arabia since late 2016. It's been a journey, and we're going to hear about it and hear about the Holacracy today, inshallah. Every year during the holy month of Ramadan, we give back to our community, and by offering our daily talks and workshops that embraces different values. We call it Zakat Ilm, which means the charity of knowledge. We decided that our theme for this year is humanity, because with all that is happening in the world, something about pandemic brought us back to our roots of humanity. Welcome everyone, and I would like to welcome our great speakers for tonight. And they are Brian and Rebecca, are both partners at Holacracy One, a company dedicated to evolving humanity's relationship to power. They both travel the world, hopefully, and look forward to doing so again soon, helping people in organization to adopt new ways or working and relating. So welcome, Brian and Rebecca. We're so super excited for having you tonight here.
Thanks, Reem. Thanks for having us.
Yes, likewise.
Yeah. So before we get started, do you want people should, when they have questions, they should type them into the question and answer box, yes?
Yes. Thank you for saying that and reminding me. Yes, please, anyone who have a question, please type it in the Q&A. And if you have any comments on the chat, and I will be reading both the chat and Q&A when there is time for our great speakers.
Excellent. And also just a reminder, if you would prefer to type your question in Arabic, please feel free to do so, and Reem will translate it for us so that you can still get your question answered. So if that's more comfortable for you than typing in English, please feel free to type it in Arabic. So with that, Assalamu alaikum everyone, and Ramadan Kareem. And Brian, I've got the easy job here. I just get to ask you a bunch of questions. And I wanted to start with, I gave Reem our introduction that was 3 sentences long, but maybe you could why don't you give us your origin story? Maybe your quick, super action-packed origin story. And if you could put in some sound effects and maybe some light, something theatrical, that would be great. But if not, in your own way, maybe just tell us a little bit about you and what brings you to today.
Yeah. Well, so I got started pretty young in the working world. My background's in software development, and I started coding when about the same time I learned to read. I actually learned to read on software development books. And so I was about 7 years old and spent a lot of time coding throughout childhood, but I was also really social. And I mean, it wasn't just your stereotypical, in a closet computer geek. I also wanted to connect and to be part of a team. So I would recruit my friends to build basically video games with me. So we'd have an artist and a writer and like somebody else designing it, and we'd form a little team. And so really young, I got really interested in this. How do we work together? Stuff. And I kind of did that throughout childhood. I spent probably more time in that than I ever did in school, working on these teams and building our own little products. It was a creative expression for us. And from there, I ended up dropping out of every school pretty much I've ever been in. It just wasn't, I wasn't learning as much as I was on my own, working with others on a real project. And so school didn't really work for me, but I started in the working world when I started my first business when I was 13. I started teaching people to code online. This was pre-internet. And I found I really liked business too. I really liked this, finding something of value to offer people enough that they wanted to pay me, which, at the time I was getting like $25 an hour, which when you're 13 is a fortune, and it was pretty exciting. So, and that kind of led to, I wanted to enter the working world and see what it was like in real companies. So got kind of my first real job when I was 16. And then by the time I was 18, I had joined an aerospace software company and I was writing code that was flying satellites to Mars. And it was really exciting to be part of space exploration. And what I found though, which was really interesting, I was really focused on the software. I knew a lot about that. I had a lot of practice by 18. And as I'm working in this company, it was a fairly small company, a couple hundred people. I realized the biggest obstacles to our technical architecture were not technical. They were the human system around us. It was the bureaucracy in the system, the politics in the system. Those were the things that were actually getting in the way of working together far more than the actual software. The limits on our ability to code really amazing work was not technical, it was human. And it was, but it wasn't any one person. At first I thought, we must have a few bad apples, but as I got a little bit more seasoned and explored some of that, and I realized this wasn't really any one individual or even group. It was something about the system itself. It encouraged the kind of limits that I'd seen. The resistance to change was just baked in. So I went into management, and by the time I was about 21, I was the chief technology officer of a .com era company at the time, building my own team, and still frustrated, still fed up. So I left that and I started my own company. And I thought, hey, as CEO, maybe then I can really, build things differently. And what I found was I was starting to recreate the same kind of environment that I had worked so hard to escape. And that sent me, I got really depressed for a while with that. Like, how can we not escape these dynamics? And I don't want to recreate the same kind of environment that was soul crushing for me. So I kind of dedicated myself to experimenting. And I said, I'm going to turn my software company into a laboratory. And we're just going to try anything and everything, anything that will help us build a different kind of environment that gives people more ability to drive meaningful change, that gives people more empowerment, more meaning in their work, that lets them actually use their creativity in the way that I experienced when I was a kid working with friends and then lost somehow when I was in the corporate world. So that led to years of experimentation. And eventually we named the system that we were kind of developing to see, we called it Holacracy, and I never expected it would spread. I thought it was just my company's unique way of working. But it turns out we had created a fairly generic framework, something that really could be applied by others. And I had friends that ran companies that started getting interested. And before I knew it, it started spreading. And I kind of left my software company. This was 13 years ago or so now, to start my current company to help Holacracy grow and spread. And since then, it's way beyond software. In fact, software companies are a tiny minority of the companies using this now. It is so much broader, and as me being here is, I think, a testament. It's used in companies all over the world in all different cultures to change the nature of the game from so much of what we're used to in corporate America, corporate world.
So, all right, so you got us to today. Cool. So now the next chapter. you spoke a little bit in your story about meaning for people, meaning for work, and how to not recreate that which you did not like. So today, our purpose at Holacracy One is to evolve humanity's relationship to power. But I would love for you to share a little bit, you know, this interview is about the relationship between power and love. And those aren't things that you see joined together intimately very often. So can you tell us a little bit about, one, your view of that relationship between power and love, and also how you got to it? Because it's not necessarily an intuitive leap, even for you, since it's relatively new for you as well.
Yeah, I think there was something I was kind of always seeking, even if I didn't really know what exactly it was. And I imagine anyone that's been in a traditional company probably has some intuition too, that things could just be better. And you know, how to make them better is that's a huge challenge, but there's at least an intuition, and I had that too. And the more I felt into that, it's like I wanted to be able to be powerful, and it's a little not very, I don't know, politically correct in our most cultures today to acknowledge that. But and by that, I don't just mean like to serve my ego or whatever. I wanted to drive change. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to actually create, to have an impact, you know? I wanted to be powerful, but I also wanted to be human. And there's so much in our modern companies that seem to crush both of those. Like so much I experienced, and I see so many people suffering from, is, you know, they go into a typical job and suddenly they don't feel powerful. They don't feel like they can drive really meaningful impact and change and difference. They don't feel powerful, but they also have to check their humanity at the door. They can't be a full human with emotions and heart and bad days and get stuck and get angry. They have to hide all of that. We have to manage our reputation and our image and show up in these nice professional packaged boxes, you know? And it's like taking all of us and filtering down to pretend we're just this tiny little thing, which is all, you know, rational and unemotional and whatever. We have to show up in this way that is so, I don't know, to me, just crushes so much of the humanity out of it. And something about our corporate world incentivizes that. It's expected, you know? And to me, in part of what I realized I lost in that was, to say it in a word, was love, right? But of everything, of myself. Like, how can you love yourself if you can't bring your full self to work, if you can't be seen, you know? And how can you invite others to fall in love with something about you if you can't bring your full self and just let yourself be human and be complete and be whole, you know? And how can you expect to really deeply care about the people you work with, you know, if you're bringing this tiny little fraction of yourself to work and that's all you're seeing of them? And I found these two actually go together, power and love. It's like the environments we're in when we have no power, when we have to like work through the system and play politics, and there's something about those environments that also crush the humanity out of us. These two seemed more and more linked the more I experimented, you know? And then we can't be our full, vulnerable, authentic selves, loving selves, because we have to manage our image, right? Just to get work done, you know? So it's, I started being really hungry for how can we get all the obstacles out of the way so that we can fully be powerful and we can be human, we can be loving, we can be connected, we can be authentic and vulnerable. And how can all of that all go together?
Yep. I've heard you in the past kind of reframe your idea of power. You know, we have people in the audience today who probably are bosses and people who are also subordinates. And one of the things I've heard you talk about over and over is a transition from power over to power with. Because in owning your own power, there's still room for everyone else to own theirs as well. And what that starts to bring into the workplace, especially when you're talking about humanity and bringing your whole self, is the idea of being able to hold boundaries. Think about the current job descriptions most people have. it usually includes something like other duties as assigned, other activities, other things that they have to do. It's hard to keep boundaries, both professional and personal, if you're, one, trying to manage your image, as you said, but also trying to bring your full self to work. So maybe you can talk, and I'm going to throw this in here because we did pick resilience as our sub-theme. So if you could talk a little bit maybe about that, what that transition from power over to power with looks like, and how being aware of your power, if you want to bring boundaries in, how this can foster resilience in both people and organizations, since we are in a time where resilience has never been more important.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot in there. Where to start? Oh man, there was something I really wanted to speak to. What was the beginning part of your question again?
The beginning
power over to power with.
Power over to power with.
Yeah. So one of the things I often get asked, I do a lot of interviews and all that, and I often get asked, how did I deal with giving up my power, as a former CEO when I was moving into creating this system? And I think the question itself has a totally flawed assumption in it, which is that somehow I gave up my power. I didn't. And Holacracy is not about that, right? So for those managers and entrepreneurs and founders listening, you do not need to give up your power to do this. That's not the point, right? When I say I want to be powerful, I didn't suddenly give that up because I'm a CEO. Now I don't want to be. No, I still want to be able to drive change, use all of my wisdom, all of my expertise. In fact, I started finding as a CEO, I didn't have as much power as I wanted because I was trying to be a good leader. So I would tone down, I would dial back my own conviction, my own energy, my own opinions, because I didn't want to disempower others. I didn't want to show up and boss people around. So I would stop using my expertise. And that's tragic. I have a lot of it. I've been doing this a long time. I know something about business and business building, and I want to bring all of that. I want to bring my full self too. I don't just want to create an environment where I have to sacrifice myself so everyone else gets to bring their full self, right? And I don't think that's good for the business because I do have expertise that's lost when I do that. So I want to be powerful too. The difference is not, and Holacracy is not about stripping power away from the bosses and the founders. It's about raising power of everyone else, right? It's not about me giving something up. It's about me creating more power in the system. It's not taking the amount of power we have and slicing the pie differently. It's enlarging the pie. I still have as much power as I did as a CEO. In fact, I'd say I have more. I feel more capable in this environment to actually use my expertise. And I don't have to worry about disempowering others when I do, because they have more power too, right? I get to use my wisdom. I get to drive change. When I have a role, I get to lead my role. I get to lead it more autocratically than I did as a CEO, right? Because it's safer to. As a CEO, I had to make more room for more consensus and more buy-in because I didn't want to step on others. I didn't want to be a dictator, right? But with Holacracy, it invites us all to be a dictator of our role and a good follower of others' roles, right? So now I don't have to suddenly pull myself back. I just get the roles that I really should lead. I'm good at leading. I'm the best person to lead these roles. And I lead those parts of my system. And, Rebecca, you've got roles and you lead them and you're like a little dictator for your roles, right? You know that. And I get to follow your lead when you roll, when you lead your roles, and then others have theirs.
You get to follow my lead when I roll.
Yeah.
Because as interviewer, one of my roles here, my chunks of work, is to kind of monitor the questions and the chat. Before we get into all those other juicy bits that I asked you, which I will also remind you, there were a couple of great questions. The first one is, I'm going to put you on the spot because everyone's got a different answer. Can you give us your elevator pitch, your explanation for those people on the call who maybe are a little less familiar? Can you tell us what Holacracy is? You keep referring to it.
Yeah, Holacracy is a different framework for running a company. It's a replacement or an alternative to management hierarchy, right? What we're used to in companies is a CEO or executive director or whatever, somebody at the top of a hierarchy who holds all the power. And then they break it down a hierarchy of managers, right? That's what we're used to. Holacracy is an alternative, but it still achieves similar goals, right? It's not just the absence of managers. It's an alternative way of getting to the same place, right? In fact, it gets there better. What we ideally want in a management hierarchy is not managers who micromanage and boss people around. Ideally, we want managers that create clarity and empower, ones that say, here's your job, here's your responsibilities, here's your goals, right? Within these boundaries, you have the freedom to lead. You don't have to come talk to me. You don't have to get buy-in. Within these boundaries, you lead towards these goals. And when you go outside these boundaries, then you need to talk to me or someone else or whatever. That's what we want in a management hierarchy. We don't want micromanagement. We want managers who lead by empowering others within clear boundaries and clear expectations. Holacracy is a different way to get clear expectations, clear boundaries, and empower people to lead their part. And it does it not by asking managers to do it, because frankly, it's really hard to do. And when you get a manager that's actually good at that, they get promoted and replaced by a manager who's not good at that because there's not enough to go around, right? It's really hard. Holacracy gives you processes that help get there and ones that invite everyone on a team to be part of that job of creating clarity of who does what, who makes which decisions, what are the boundaries, what are the expectations. We call it a governance process. So Holacracy adds this governance process to every team and invites everyone in the team to be part of the management of the team or breaking down the work and defining who does what. Right? So it gives you the same general structure and clarity that you get in management hierarchy, but it does it better and differently. And it's a framework or a set of processes for doing that. So that's Holacracy in a nutshell.
Yeah. And to be fair, since it is such a disruptive and radically different way of organizing companies, that's one of the best versions of the nutshell I've ever heard. And we have a lot more information on our website because it takes some time to really truly understand. I just wanted to catch a few people up. There was an interesting question that got posed that I've not seen before. And before we leave the topic of the power pie that you described, the idea that power is not a finite pie, that if my slice is larger, yours is smaller, but that it's an infinite pie. And as I get more, you can have more too. In your opinion, can you maybe talk a little bit about your distinction between power and control? Because that came up in the questions. I thought it was really interesting because in current management hierarchies, there is clear delineation of what you're perceptually supposed to have control over. Do you see them as synonymous or do you see them as distinct?
Similar. I'd say something like, I mean, we can use any definition we want, but when I think of power, I think of the ability to actually drive change or make a difference or get a result, which is different than control. Control is one way. You can control something in order to drive change or get a result. But frankly, control often doesn't get you there. A lot of managers technically have control of things, of people and of processes, and they still find they don't actually have the power to drive real change and get real results. Something else is in the way, right? And likewise, you can have power even in a management hierarchy when you don't technically have control. So in my case, I may have had technically more control as a CEO, right, in a management hierarchy, but now I definitely have more power, right? Now, I have a lot of control as well. But the difference is so does everyone else. I can change things in my company, but so can you, and so can the newest hire, right? They show up in one of our governance meetings, and they can propose changing any process or any role or any policy on the team. So everyone has a lot of control to drive change within some limits and some bounds. Right? And that tool, the extra control, gives everyone more power. And that's one of the common themes I find of my work. It's been, how do we give people just more control, not divide it differently? Let's just give everyone more control. And part of that might mean a little less control in some ways. As a CEO, I had the control to have my ego run over everybody and be a dictator. And I don't have that in Holacracy, right? I don't have that now. I had to give up that. But I get more power to actually drive meaningful change. I just have to use a process that everyone else can use as well to drive change, right? We all have access to the management function now. And same, I saw a question in the chat about accountability. Who holds accountability? Well, in a management hierarchy, the answer is in theory one person, the manager, right? But in Holacracy, it's not about less accountability, it's more. Who holds someone accountable? Everyone who works with them, every stakeholder. And they have real tools with real power to do that, right? If I want something, from you, Rebecca, in your role, I know exactly what I can expect from you. I know how to request it. If you're not doing it, I know what I can do as a result to get my needs met. And it's not just because I'm the boss. Anyone you work with can do that, right? You can do that with me as much as I can do that with you. So there's more people holding people accountable, not less. It's not single point of failure now, one manager. It's everyone in a team can hold each other accountable, which frankly is how really good teams, even in a management hierarchy, function. You don't have to rely on just the manager to hold people accountable because the team holds themselves accountable.
That's awesome. And so that also I think that brings us back to where we can, let's bring some love back in now. Mm-hmm. So part of, I think, the reason that the image control and bringing a professional package of yourself works, or, there's the perception that works in management hierarchy, is whether we like to or not, we use our love of each other to drive change in the shadows. And so I would love for you to talk, I would love for you to talk a little bit about maybe some of the highlights and joys, and then maybe some of the messy bits of now bringing your full self and trying to be loving and caring and compassionate for those people, for me, when you need something from my role and maybe I'm not delivering it to your satisfaction. How do you hold those two pieces of power and ability to be transparent in expectation, along with love and care for me as a human? That's so important right now. We're all trying to take care of each other, but we still have stuff to get done. Yeah. So how do you navigate those two things?
One of the things I found is so key or powerful in that is to kind of go the opposite direction that I see most people intuitively going today. I think most people intuitively try to kind of put those two together and show up in a way that is really caring and loving while they're asking somebody to do something or trying to convince them to do something. So these two get really fused, the way we use power and the way we care, right? They get all messy together. And so, we find ourselves then trying to get organizational changes or actions or whatever by leaning on the personal relationship. Right? And this describes most cultures that I've encountered in the world today, where the modern business culture is build relationships with people and then use them to get a result, right? So you have somebody leaning on the friendship, leaning on the personal relationship they've built to try to get the person to support them in their work initiative or project or whatever. And that might seem like a good idea, but it's messy. It's putting two things together and each one starts almost abusing the other in a way. It's like we can't fully lead and get the organization's needs met because we're really concerned about the care and the humans. And then at the same time, we can't really be deeply caring because we're also trying to achieve a result through the care. So it's messy, it's not pure. Pure love is when you don't expect anyone to do anything for you or to change for you. When you can just accept them as they are and not need them to be different for you, right? That's one of the lessons I learned in my journey with my father, who struggled with all sorts of challenges in life. And he died 10 years ago or so now. And towards the end of his life, he was struggling with a major drug addiction. And he would often ask things of me, and at first, I would try to help him and support him. I'd loan him money, which he only used to buy more drugs. And it was messy, right? And I would often find myself wanting him to get off of this. Of course, I loved him. I wanted him to change. And for me, there was this powerful shift when I just found acceptance. I found peace and something clicked and I no longer needed him to be different at all. But I still managed my boundaries. He'd ask me for money and I'd say, no, I'm not going to give you that money. I'm going to hold my own boundary. But at the same time, I love you and I'm there for you. And here's what I will do to support you. And I don't need you to be different. It's okay, however you are. And I was just there to give him loving presence. And ironically, he did eventually, towards the very end of his life, kick his drug habit. And he told me that that was the single most helpful and powerful thing of anyone in his network did to help him get off of it. It wasn't all the people who were pushing them for their own personal reasons for him to get clean. It was me just completely accepting him and saying, I don't need you to be different. I love you exactly as you are. And I'm going to take care of myself, but I love you exactly as you are. You know, that was the single most powerful thing for him to actually break the drug addiction. So, you know, getting a little off, but I think the same is true going back to organizations, where when we show up with people and we try to use the care and the relationship to try to change something for our agenda, it's messy. And so the opposite direction from that intuitive one is to say, no, we're going to keep these in separate domains. And if I need something of you in your roles, we're going to have a clear role structure. We're going to have a clear set of expectations. I know what I can expect of you, and I don't have to lean on the relationship. I can say, hey, Rebecca, I see it's your job to do this. Please take an action to do it. You know, or, hey, Rebecca, I'm going to task you to do that because you're responsible for it. I'm not trying to convince. I'm not being a jerk about it. I can be friendly in the message, but it's not leaning on the relationship. I'm not saying, please do me a favor, you know, personal favor. Could you do this for me? I'm not. I'm saying, hey, this is your job. Or I'm saying, look, this is not your job. So, you know, if you want to help, I invite it, but I'm not requesting you to I'm not pushing you to do it. I'm not asking for a favor, you know. And on the other hand, I can show up and I can just connect with you. I can say, you know, hey, I noticed you sounded a little off in that meeting. Like, are you stressed? Is there anything I can do to support you? And that's not me trying to get something from you. That's me offering you care. That's me offering connection. And I can keep these two differentiated. Not totally separated, because they might, one breath might follow the next. It might be, hey, I have an action for you. Can you take that? And in the next breath, I might say, hey, you seemed off in that meeting. Is there anything I can do to support you? So they're not totally removed. They exist in the same person, sometimes in the same conversation, but they're clean and differentiated. Or to quote my friend David Allen, who wrote the book Getting Things Done, or GTD, when he was going through the Holacracy adoption process and he got this principle, he said, I get it. What you're saying is it's an inappropriate use of love and care to use love and care to affect a result. And then he realized that's what our business has been doing. We have a loving, caring environment, and we've been using that loving, caring energy in order to drive results. And what you're saying is that there is a deeper level of love and care available to us when we have a better process to expect things of each other and get results. So we don't have to lean on the personal relationships to do it, right? We can be more loving and more connected when we have a clear, separate way, differentiated process to get clear actions and clear results.
And I love this because I also want to kind of add in here, it leaves room for genuine favor asking. We ask each other of favors all the time, but it's so clear that it's a personal request with no expectation and this is the one thing that I see in management hierarchies all the time, is if you don't do me this thing that I have phrased as a favor, there might be negative ramifications to you in a professional capacity, which is not really a favor.
No,
so,
it's not, it's a demand.
And we use that terminology, and I hear that all the time in, oh, so-and-so did me a favor, approved my vacation request, so now I have to agree with their marketing plan. And what you end up with is this transactional exchange of care that breeds shadow and messiness.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would love to maybe ask you to zoom in a little bit, kind of particularly speaking about how this distinction and then simultaneous use of love and power have made you, and maybe what you've seen in organizations, how has it lent itself to resilience and agility? You know, what are some of those benefits? And if you can focus on resilience, because I want to be honest about our sub theme. I picked it, so I gotta plug our sub theme. You know, how that helps, because it also is super relevant today. We need organizations and people who are resilient.
Yeah, well, I think powerful environments are resilient environments. When everyone involved can drive change meaningfully, efficiently, effectively, without all the bureaucracy that we're used to, without having to call that giant meeting and talk about it for months and months and months to get everyone to agree on it before we can change. That's not resilient. If you need to change fast, good luck. If you have to call a giant meeting and talk about it for months and months and months and socialize things, right? That doesn't breed resilience. That breeds very slow to change, slow to respond environments. So to me, powerful people create resilient environments, right? When you have a team full of everyone that can really get work done, they can drive change. They know what they can decide without a meeting, right? They know what's theirs to lead, right? They know what they can expect of each other. They don't have to play all the politics and be all, careful and ask for favors. And they can just go to someone and say, hey, this is your job. Can you do this for me? Done. And oh, this is mine. I'm just going to lead it and make a decision. FYI, I decided this. If anyone has any requests of me, feel free to make them, right? That's powerful. And when you can do that, you can change quickly. And it's the ability to change and respond quickly that gives you resilience. Right. And I do think right now we have so many businesses in the world today that have been thrust into a greater need for resilience than I think many of us have dealt with before. And I have a hunch that's only going to get more. So I do think we need more resilient environments than we have today. And the good thing is that that's not just useful in times of crisis, right? When you have the ability to respond quickly and powerfully to your world, that helps in everything. That helps when you have a customer who has a minor complaint. Well, let's quickly, resiliently, agilely respond to that. Let's powerfully respond to that and learn from it and change something. Cool. You get better customer service when you do that with every customer complaint or inquiry, or at least consider it. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's just so much value to that. And, it seems I find it funny how little power is discussed, right? It's almost
it's often seen as a bad word.
Yeah. Yep. We try to look not powerful. Mm-hmm. And I want environments where we can embrace being powerful. And I think we try to look not powerful. We resist it. We avoid talking about it because we often see it as opposed to our humanity, to kindness, to heart, and as soon as we see these as not only not opposed, but actually they're synergistic. They're each one contributes to the other in the right structure. Maybe not in a traditional management hierarchy, but in the right structure, these help each other. That frees us from our shame in talking about power. And then we can say, no, how can we be more powerful together? How can we all be more powerful together? Because that's going to create resilience. It's going to create better service. Everything we want in business. And it's going to create more human businesses too.
Yep. And just as it does in business, I'd love to take you, into the personal. You touched on it just a little bit with your father and with boundaries, but you and I have talked about this at length, and we hear this from people in organizations who have adopted Holacracy, that their personal lives change too. There was actually a question, how can we apply the differentiation of love and power in our personal lives, people we live with and our own selves? We're in a situation right now where we're trying to get work done while cohabitating with the same people all day. And I suspect, and I can say with personal knowledge, is it can put a strain on your loving relationships in your home, which is now also your office and your school. So, if you want to talk a little bit about some of the benefits in your personal life of this differentiation and ownership of power and love together that can translate from the business world to just the human living world.
Yeah. For me, there's something around part of, being powerful is having clear ownership, right? Knowing what is mine to lead and not falling into the kind of victim mode, right? Victim energy. So, and part of that is being clear on my boundaries. When I start feeling like a victim, it's usually a sign that I haven't owned my power in some way, or I haven't set my boundaries clearly. And part of that in a personal context is knowing when to say no, not to default to say yes just because I love the person. No more than in my work world. I'm going to default to saying yes because I actually care about my coworkers. No, I'm going to be clear and clean. Is this for me to own and lead? And where are my boundaries? So to use an example, the last time my father asked me to borrow money, he told me he had taken a loan from a drug dealer, and the drug dealer was coming after him with a baseball bat and was going to break his legs if he didn't pay off the loan. So can I borrow money? And the thing is, last time I had loaned my dad money in kind of similar circumstances, he just paid off the loan and then took a new loan to buy more drugs. So it didn't actually help anything. So, I felt into it, and I was really clear and clean on my boundary. And I said, no, I won't loan you money. But if he comes and breaks your legs, I'll be there in the hospital with you, and I will give you a place to stay while you recover and live. You're welcome to stay in my guest room. I'll give you care. I hire a nurse if you need it. I'll do all of that for you, but I won't loan you the money. And I said that with no judgment, just with love. It was clear and clean. I can powerfully choose what is mine, and I can do that in minor ways in my home life too. When my partner asks me to do something, instead of an automatic yes, I can think about it. Am I okay with this? Do I want this? And if the answer is no, well, it doesn't have to just be a no, good luck. It can be okay, well, let's have a conversation, So part of that too is being clear on expectations. This is especially on what I expect from others. So if I live with somebody, it's hard not to develop some expectations, right? I start expecting that she's going to do this thing because she's done it for a while or whatever. And so for me, I try to notice my own expectations and be really clear. If they're not explicit and agreed to, I don't actually have the right to expect it. So if I feel like frustrated that she's not doing something I'm expecting, I take that on myself. Instead of being a victim and putting it on her, take it on myself and say, well, okay, I can't expect this. She hasn't agreed to it. So if I want her to do this thing, I have to ask her for an agreement. I have to say, hey, will you agree to take on this responsibility? Just like in a company, I'm not going to expect something of somebody that isn't clearly part of their role. So for me, I'm navigating expectations. I'm managing my own boundaries. I'm saying no when it's not my responsibility to do something either. And I'm doing that cleanly with no judgment and no frustration as much as I can. Of course, I'm not perfect. Nobody is. But I think paying attention to that, your own boundaries and your expectations, that's a life skill. It's, I think, especially important when you live with somebody and you're locked up with them full time, right? Notice your expectations and recognize when you're frustrated. That's good data for you, but it's not data about the other person doing something wrong often, right? It's often data about your implicit expectations that they haven't actually agreed to. So you need to start by getting to an agreement. Or sometimes when you're frustrated, it's your own dropping your boundaries. If I had said yes and given my dad that money, I would have been so mad at him. But wait, why am I mad at him? It's me that dropped my boundary and wasn't true to myself and true to my own no. Right? So if I can't give somebody a clean no, I can't give a clean yes. Mm-hmm. So I have to really own that decision powerfully, and whatever the answer, yes or no, if I'm owning it powerfully, I'm not going to be frustrated whatever happens on the other side because it's my decision,
Yep. So one of the things that I'm hearing you say, and I also want to caveat this with, you are years and years into this practice, and the ability to own your choices so cleanly is a developed skill. If I could ask you maybe to think back to when you were that a little more that yes man, or you weren't able to differentiate your frustration in someone else's actions with your frustration of your own choice. For people who are new to this, maybe talk a little bit about what's it gonna feel like the first time someone is brave enough to say no, that I'm gonna own my choice to say no, because that is hard and scary. And maybe what advice might you give for someone who is a yes person, who's experimenting and trying to build this developmental capacity and try a no for the first time? It is scary. What will it feel like? And maybe what would you tell me? What have you told me when we've been in these situations?
Yeah, so I find the most powerful tool for working on myself in this, and I think this is true for many people, is in language, right? Your language reflects how you're making sense of something. So if you want to change how you're making sense of something, that's hard to see directly, but you can see the language you're using, and you can choose to use different language, and that will start shifting the way you look at things, right? So there's techniques in language. So for example, I think one of the most powerful tips I can give for developing more of the skill, I'll summarize it as own your experience. And this comes from a movement in the US called the Authentic Relating World, and they write a lot about this. There's a blog post called Owning Your Experience. It's really, really great read. And so basically the idea is when I speak, when I share something, I want to make statements that, especially when there's charge, when I'm frustrated or there's some kind of emotion behind it, make statements that cannot possibly be argued with. And what that means is, to do that, I have to say something that is completely owning my experience, because that's the one thing no one else can argue with, right? If I say, you know, Rebecca, you did something really shitty. Well, that could be argued with. You can say, I don't think I did something shitty, right? Or whatever, you know? But when I say, Rebecca, I feel, what's that?
Yeah, the other version is, you did something bad and I feel attacked.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, and if I go to my own feelings, right, like I feel angry, that can't be argued with. That's my experience. No one can possibly argue with, I feel this way. Now, of course, the challenge is sometimes this gets simplified as using I statements, but that's not enough. I can say, Rebecca, I feel like you did something really stupid, right? Which is an I statement, and I use the word feel, but that's not.
Can be argued. Because I can say, I feel like I did not do something stupid.
If the word feel is followed by the word like, you're not actually conveying your own experience and emotion, right? You're conveying a thought and a judgment about somebody else, right? So the more I can, you know, start when I'm feeling something like, oh my God, you know, Rebecca, you did something awful, right? Or Rebecca, you made me mad, or whatever. Like that is like, what a victim like stance there. I can shift that, and I can just notice that that's the language coming up for me. There's nothing wrong with that if that's what's coming up for me and that's the language that pops into my mind. But I can choose to be a little mindful, and instead of dumping that language on somebody, right? Or maybe after the fact, if I do dump it on somebody, I can reflect and I can start working on my language. How do I get that to owning my experience? Well, okay. You know, Rebecca, when you did this concrete behavior, when you sent that email to so-and-so and said the thing you did in the email or whatever, I felt really like, I don't know, what is this feeling? I felt angry, and, you know, maybe I felt a little defensive, actually. You know, that's how I felt. That's my experience. And then I can expand. Well, what's that about for me? Well, you know, I think there are like, I have like a need. I think I feel a desire to like really look good in front of that person. And so I think my story is, you know, by you saying that thing, I didn't look good, and that triggers like something for me. And so now I'm starting to shift it. And that's way easier for you to engage with me in, because now I'm not just saying, Rebecca, you're a bad person, you did this horrible thing, when you don't actually share that story, right? Like, so owning my experience and my language, to me, is one of the core skills to start building this more mindfulness. And I have to tell you, since I got really good at that, my personal relationships have seen a huge, huge benefit, right? There's a big difference in the kind of relationships you're able to build and what kind of conflict you can safely have and navigate. Now I don't have to choose to either repress my feelings for the sake of keeping peace, or expressing them, but in a way that's so messy it just blows up and makes things worse, right? Now I can like completely own my experience and not dump on the other person, but still have a conversation and help them understand me better. You know, I can even ask them, hey, are you willing to try to understand what's going on in me? Because I'm feeling all sorts of stuff right now. You know, will you help get my world and understand me some? And this to me all comes back to language. Just noticing, is my language something that someone could argue with? Or is my language only about my experience, right? And my stories, am I owning it? So that for me is, I guess, one of the key tips I'd offer.
And that's great. And that works both in, we've seen it work both in a deeply personal setting and also in professional settings. If you're clean in your language professionally and your colleague can't argue with you on the statement, you can't make someone also have clean language. You can't force someone to develop in that same capacity. But what you can do is own your own charge and your own experience to keep from escalating further. And I think that's often what happens in both personal and professional relationships. I say, Brian, you did this. And rather than leaving space and knowing I may not be clean in my language and just leaving space, what we often see is, well, you did that. And it just mirrors back and forth and bounces and makes the mess snowballs. So the work's not getting done or the personal relationship is suffering. Even if one person, even if I'm not clean in my language, but you are, you can hold the space for me to get rid of my charge, or at least feel heard, knowing that that will likely then lead to developmental capacity building of my own.
Yeah,
you can't force it, but you can leave space for it.
No, and when you model this, that helps everyone you're working with.
Absolutely. Right? And it's one of the best expressions of love, in my opinion, to be so powerful in yourself that you can leave space for others to be messy. Yes, and we don't do that in our working relationships as much as I think we could. And that's why I love, go ahead.
Oh, no, I love what you're saying. And it's a high bar. And I just want to call out, like, I'm not perfect at this at all. In fact, I often self-judge myself for not doing this as well as I want to my own ideals, especially when the other person is showing up really messy and not owning their experience. It's easy for me to get stuck in it then and get pulled there. But what I try to do, my ideal is I want to be so powerful in my own stance and my own ownership that it's okay. I can hold space for them to be messy and not take it on, right? And maybe ask some questions. Maybe just be clear and clean in my boundaries, even to the point of saying, you know, I'm actually not willing to continue engaging in this dynamic, in this conversation right now. So I'm going to remove myself, but I'm willing to engage with you later, you know, or whatever, which I've done in personal relationships. And it works surprisingly well when I do that without judgment and blame, when I just own my own boundaries and take care of myself. You know, there's so much value there. And when I do that well, I know it changes people around me too. And when they do it well, it helps me, you know, so yeah.
And it works great in a working environment. One, maybe you can catch me on this if I'm not getting it quite right. But what we often do is we jump to blame before acceptance and mindfulness. So if I see something go wrong, our tendency in organizations is not to look at the systemic issue or an accident. We jump right to who can I blame? Because we're trying to manage our own self-image, and we certainly don't want the finger pointing at us. Who can I blame for this mix-up? And what can I control, or what power can I exert to where it doesn't happen again, versus a blameless question of what happened, what part did I play, and how can I change so this doesn't happen again?
Yeah, I think we often, especially in an organizational context, we often confuse system problems for performance problems, right? We see something and we get frustrated with somebody and we get into the blame mode and we say, this person screwed up, you know, or whatever. And, or maybe it's kinder and it's, oh, they're just too junior, or right, they don't have the experience. And that may sometimes be true, but I think more often than not, what we often are seeing is a system problem. And it's just a simpler view that looks at it as, oh, this person screwed up, when really what you have is a system that is going to reliably recreate that same kind of result. It might look like somebody screwed up, but in reality, they didn't have the right information to the right time and the right way to actually make a better decision or whatever. So there's something about the flow of work through the system that's led to this issue. And when we mistake that as a performance problem and we address it as a performance problem, we really do a disservice to that person, right? And to the whole organization, you know, and to ourselves, honestly, as well. And that's part of what I think creates cultures where people are afraid of being blamed. So we manage our image and we try to look good. But when we get a culture where the default assumption is, before we assume it's a person problem, a performance problem, let's assume it's a system problem. Let's assume everybody acted intelligently and everyone did the right thing. And let's look at, how did the system create this issue? Now, there will be times where we look into that more and we see, oh, and actually it was a performance problem. And that's fine, but we can even then say, how did the system allow somebody without the right skills to get into the job where they can have a performance problem? Even that is a system problem, right? And when we address things by looking at it at the system level, we're honoring the person more and assuming, look, we're assuming you did the best you could, and somehow the system failed you. So let's look together and work on the system. And then we can invite them into it with us. Help us see, be vulnerable with us. What happened? So that we can together work on the system, you know? Ideally then you have a good framework to work on the system, which is, you know, one of the things Holacracy provides that I think we lack in a lot of management hierarchies. There's no good way to work on the system. So no wonder we look at it as people problems. That's the one thing we know how to do. We know how to boss people around and trade people out of jobs or whatever. So we look at everything and see it through this lens of that's the one thing we can control. So we're going to look at everything as if it's a performance problem. When you step back and you have a lens to look at the way the whole system flows and the way all the processes are designed and all the roles fit together, then you can start having more meaningful conversations about how to improve the system.
Awesome. I want to ask you one more question from me, and then we've got so many great questions in the Q&A, so I want to get to a bunch of those. But you just touched on vulnerability, and I would love to hear you talk just a little bit more, kind of in rounding out our question and answer with the idea, you know, I can imagine that vulnerability is often viewed as anti-power. I won't be perceived as powerful. I have a story that I won't be perceived as powerful if I show vulnerability. I think that's wrong, and I want to, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on how power and vulnerability can coexist beautifully, because I think they can.
I would go even further. It's not just to me that they can coexist. It's that true vulnerability is so powerful. It changes people. When you're vulnerable with somebody, you touch them, you change them. And when you're vulnerable in a company and in a culture, it can't help but change things around you. And it's such a reflection of strength. There's something in doing it that communicates, I am strong enough in myself to share something, you know, that is vulnerable. I mean, even in this like chat, you know, I shared with however many strangers are watching this to me, you know, stories about my father, and, you know, that's a vulnerable story for me. And especially sharing that, you know, I told him no instead of giving him money when somebody was going to break his legs, you know, that's vulnerable to admit, to open up about. But, you know, how did that land? Did that land just for those listening, you know, what did that do? My guess is for most people anyway, right, that didn't cause people to think less of me, you know. If anything, it probably conveyed a sense of like, hey, I am both open, I'm honest about that stuff, and it's a little scary to be, and it comes from strength. It comes from knowing myself and feeling confident in myself that I can go there, you know. I can let that be seen and exposed, and yeah, and so I just. And that's the kind of, what do you want to be with? Who do you want to work with? Do you want to work with the people that manage their image so much? You know, or do you want to be working with the people who can actually say, you know, I'm in a really a raw space right now, or emotions are high for me right now, and I had a really rough weekend and this stuff happened, and so I'm kind of feeling like shaky, you know. I want to work with those people. That's real, that's human, you know, and it's strong and it's powerful, and I trust those people when they can show up like that and own it themselves. And they can show up and just reveal and be seen in something that is, you know, not culturally accepted, that we can just say all the time. I mean, I find that inspiring myself too. I find that powerful. And I want to be with people like that. And the best thing I can do then is to lean into it myself, especially when I'm feeling a little scared to do that, because leaning into it models for others that it's okay. And if you hold me in my vulnerability, I will hold you in yours. Right?
Which is such a deep expression of love.
Yes, it is.
Yes, being powerful enough to be vulnerable leaves space for people to love you better.
Yes, well said. Love it.
Yep. Cool. Thanks, Brian. Oh, I love somebody bonding over all vulnerabilities. I love that thought. So we have, I'm going to kind of change tax a little bit. We've got so many great questions. And I did promise our co-reachers that I would leave lots of time for these. So there was a great question, and this one comes up pretty often. So I want to start with this. Someone asked, what about shared values, mission, and vision? Do we sit down and discuss this stuff together and reach and agree upon consensus? Let's talk about that. Agree on what is actionable. Maybe from a lens of self-management and holacracy, what about shared mission, vision, and values?
Yeah. So I think we need to break those apart because they're very different things, and the answer may be different for different elements in there. So speaking first to, I use the frame of purpose as opposed to vision can mean different things, or mission can mean different things in different contexts, but I kind of replace that for me with just purpose. Why? Why does this organization exist? What is it here to do for the world? What is it here to do on the planet or for the people it touches? When it comes to purpose, I think the most powerful frame I've found is that's nothing we get to decide in the first place. It's something we get to discover together. So then it's not about coming to agreement. We're not agreeing on the purpose. No more than if you have a child, you don't sit down with your co-parent and agree on your child's purpose. You don't get to decide your child's purpose. You get to maybe with them discover what they're meant to be in the world, but you don't get to dictate that. And I think the same is true of our companies. It's such a powerful frame to look at it that way anyway, to say the company here is like the child that we get to raise. We, the people working in it, get to raise this child in the world. And it has a purpose that's not ours to decide through any process, right? No one gets to decide it, and we don't get to decide it. It's there. It gets to discover it, and we get to discover it, maybe on its behalf. So then the question becomes, what process helps you discover that? And I find processes that do get input from multiple people work better, but not ones that we're looking for agreement. I don't want to get into all the details now, but I'd recommend Tim Kelly's work. He's the person we used he has a process and a book. We used his methodology and him to help us discover our purpose in my company. And I just love his methods. His book is called True Purpose. His book is about finding your own personal purpose, but the methodology applies to companies and organizations as well. So, he's got a great process that does get many people involved, but it's not looking for consensus because you're discovering. So that's purpose. Values, I think, are a little different. I don't think we need necessarily to have a single set of values that we're going to apply as a company. And I know this is counter the way most companies today, especially progressive ones, operate. And I'm not saying values aren't important. I'm saying they're personal, right? So I have values, right? But my values are going to be different than everyone else's. And I don't think we need to agree on a single set of them for the company. I think what we can do is say, for this purpose, let's invite all values that are useful to the extent that they're useful for this purpose. And even different ones, and even conflicting ones. Right? And let's invite everyone to bring their whole self and their values, as long as they're useful for the purpose. Again, just like parenting, right? Each parent might have somewhat different values. And certainly when you get to extended family and teachers and the world around our children, people have different values. But when they bring them in service of the child, not to force the child for their own sake, but to say, this child is on its own journey in life. How can I use my values to support it? How can I use my values to serve its journey, right? To impart some of my own gifts and wisdom to it, or to at least offer them. And I think we can all do that even without having to agree on a single set of values. We center on purpose and we say, how do my values play in here? How can I use them? How can I serve with my values? Right? That's what I do. And I tend to value a lot of things, but there are some things that I'm just almost like my system is built to really tune into and value most. Great. How can I bring that and serve with that without demonizing values that I see as opposite? Because I don't think any values are necessarily opposite or opposed. I think they all have something. And the question is, how do we integrate them and allow them all to contribute?
So that can often take a lot of trust. And there's a great question here. It sounds like holacracy requires a lot of trust in people, that they'll be up to the job. And then the kind of the basic, okay, so how do we do that? Those with responsibility as one of their strengths find it difficult to just leave things with others. I know I have a really hard time trusting that others are going to get stuff done. So I just do it myself because then I know it gets done. But part of self-management is I do have to trust, but I don't have to trust. And I want to leave some space for you to maybe talk about the the notion of you don't have to, in holacracy practice, good holacracy practice, you actually don't have to trust anyone, and you have to trust everyone.
Yeah, that's great. One way I sometimes say that is, if we want an environment that fosters really deep trust, the worst thing we can do is require trust, right? It's paradoxical, but if I have to trust you, that's difficult. I can't take care of myself then, and that tends to breed fear and not trust. But if I have an environment where I can take care of myself, right, where I don't have to trust you because I can get my own needs met, I have transparency. I don't have to just trust you. I have transparency into what you're doing. I can just look, right? Or I don't have to trust you because I can do something myself. Great, right? The more I can not need to rely on trust, the easier and safer it is to just be like, oh, I'm just going to trust you. And then I get to see too, I get to take care of myself and own my own autonomy and integrity. And that makes it easier for me to choose to lean on trust. So there's something paradoxical there. So I often focus on how do we build environments where no one has to trust anyone so that we can all choose to deeply trust each other.
Right. And you mentioned briefly, but I see it as cyclical. Transparency breeds trust, and trust leads to greater transparency. And
there's a feedback loop there for sure. Yep. So what can you do if you want to increase trust? Try to increase transparency. Try to increase, the other part of that is self-reliance, the ability for people to drive change themselves. If you have power and can have impact, you don't need to trust others as much. And if you have transparency into others' work, you don't have to trust them as much. So if you want to increase trust, increase those two things and let that naturally increase trust. And then when that happens, what you'll find is it becomes much easier to increase those other two things. People are safer giving more transparency when they do trust each other. So it's not that we don't want trust. It's not that trust isn't useful. It's that if you directly try to tell people, trust each other, you undermine trust, right? It's actually a personal practice of mine. I try to never tell anyone, please trust me, right? I never want to ask anyone to trust me because that's going to undermine trust, right? I want to instead go the other way. And I ask myself, how can I make sure this person doesn't have to trust me? And then I find people really trust me.
Yep. So that's kind of leading in, you've got trust, but then there's also, power and trust and all that. There's also the element of influence. And there's a great question here. Do you think if you really love what you do, this will help influence others and you can lead as an example? Maybe talk a little bit about how, when you don't have explicit power to lean on like you do in a management hierarchy, but you don't want to use shadow, love and care and quid pro quo, how do you use influence? You can use influence really well. Maybe talk a little bit about some of the benefits of being able to use influence transparently. We talk about pitches.
Yeah, absolutely. When you have clarity, when you know what you can expect of each other and you know whose job it is to lead in any given area, I'm not saying lead overall, I'm saying in any given role or work, right? And in our company, we do trainings, and Rebecca, it's your job to pick where do we do our trainings, and it's my job to pick how do I actually do the training when I'm delivering it. And right, we have different roles and we know who's leading what. And when that's clear, it frees us to go give strong opinions. So I do this all the time, and I love being able to do this. I'll often go to someone and I'll say, hey, Rebecca, I know this is yours to lead. Let me give you my pitch, right? In other words, my most convincing argument I can for what I think you should do, right? Rebecca, I think you should open a training in whatever, in Riyadh. And, here's why, and here's my best argument for it. And then I say, and I know it's your decision. So cool. Let me know what you decide. Now, when you have the clarity of it's yours to lead, it lets me make that pitch without worrying about accidentally disempowering you. I couldn't do that as a CEO. When I was a CEO, imagine that, right? If the CEO of the company goes to you and says, I want to give you a really strong argument of what I think you should do. Does anyone take that as a suggestion? Does anyone ever say, no, thanks, I'm going to go a different direction? But I hear that all the time. I regularly will do that. And someone will say, yeah, thanks, I hear you. I appreciate your input. And, I'm closer to it. I know some things you might not. I don't think that's actually the right decision. So I'm not going to take that advice, but thank you.
I do it all the time.
As a CEO.
Yep.
That happens all the time, right? And that actually makes it easier for me to try to influence that way. And I also want to speak to, some of the original question too of, I saw that if you love what you do, you know, does that inspire? I think so. I mean, I generally find myself more inspired by people that seem like they love what they do. They have some kind of real passion, and it doesn't always show up. Mine shows up very, you know, I don't know, expressive with my passion, but others, it's different. It can be very focused, but you can tell when you're working with somebody that has kind of a quality or an integrity focus in their work, that has that kind of energy. I want to work with more people like that. And the best way I know how to do that is just find my own passion and love and express it.
Same. So kind of digging down a little more away from bigger picture down to kind of some concrete stuff. We've got a few questions here that are very concrete. One of my favorites, because in my role, I'm often consulting with companies looking to adopt Holacracy. How to start to use Holacracy in your company if your boss doesn't accept the idea of trusting the team, or the team isn't confident. I want to kind of rephrase that a little bit for the benefit of the group. If the boss, the explicit boss, isn't bought into the idea of this type of change, what happens?
Yeah, it's very difficult to make a major shift in the way power works in a company if the person that holds the power currently isn't on board, right? If you're a CEO or sometimes a department can do it, but if the department head, at least of the department doing it, isn't bought in, or the CEO of the company, if you're doing it across the whole company, if that person that holds power isn't bought into the change, good luck. It's really hard.
No, thank you. That's exactly what I was thinking. It's one of the key indicators that the adoption is likely to fail, unfortunately, is if the power holder is not willing, not necessarily willing to just give up all their power, because we're not asking anyone to do that. We're just asking them to commit to trying a new way of working. And if they're not at least committed to that, it's really hard to get an adoption off the ground.
And that's where I think the best thing you can do if you're in that scenario, instead of trying to get them to get bought into the whole thing, that's really hard. Get them instead to just get bought in to taking a taste of it, to trying it for a couple days, and call a Holacracy coach, and get them in to run a little sample of Holacracy. We often do these as like, over 2 days, we'll do some of the processes of Holacracy with the executive team. And what that does is give them a chance to really try it on for themselves. And then you're not asking them to get bought into a massive change. You're saying, just get bought into taking 2 days and trying something. And you'll work on your real issues during those 2 days. So it'll be valuable even if you decide not to do this thing. And then you let them have a chance to get bought in themselves during those 2 days. So, or 1 day or whatever it is. But that's what we usually do to generate the buy-in, when you've got somebody that's bought in enough to take a taste, but not yet enough to really say, we're going to do this. So I'd really recommend not trying to push them to do all of Holacracy or anything like that. And instead just focus on get a taste of it with a good coach in a very short package, and let that generate more buy-in.
Yep. And we're so excited that we have Coexist there in Saudi. I know Coexist is working so hard to join our licensing program as the first organization in Saudi. They will have the most experience locally. So we're at Holacracy one of the things we're doing is supporting Coexist to be able to deliver these services there for us, because we're limited in our capacity, and they know the culture and the area so much better.
And the best coaches are the ones that have lived it in their own organization for a while before they go out and try to do Holacracy consulting. And that's exactly what we've got in Coexist there, which is one reason I'm so excited about having them as our first in Saudi. They're not just, send a bunch of people to a training and say they're coaches. They've been doing it. They've been living it. And there's something about the experience. They know how hard this is and where the challenges are and what they've wrestled with and how they've overcome those challenges. And that direct experience means so much when you're in helping another company walk down the same road, same path. So
absolutely. So Brian, do you maybe have just a couple of examples off the top of your head of companies who are using Holacracy and maybe some of the differences they've noticed aside from Coexist? I know that Reem has published pretty extensively and given TED Talks, but a couple other data points for us maybe.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's so many to choose from. Well, one of them in that part of the world is in Dubai, nearby. There's the Knowledge and Human Development Authority, which is a government agency actually that's been doing Holacracy for years now. That's inspiring. Rebecca, you've worked with them closely too.
Yeah. They were already looking for new ways of working, and they adopted Holacracy almost 3 years ago now. And they don't even hire someone for a job anymore. They hire new joiners and they bring them in from day one. They're fostering the culture and the ideals of trust and autonomy and power in an individual. And then the piece of what work they're going to do naturally just falls into place. And they move faster and smarter and are able to support education in Dubai so much better.
Yep. Yeah, there's there's so many examples. There's a law firm in Canada that's using Holacracy, and I love that as an example of just the kind of structure and regulatory environment that lawyers have to deal with, and it works beautifully for them. And at the opposite end, I just had dinner last night with a friend of mine. We're stepping into the dinner 6 feet apart quarantine but social thing, and he runs a company using Holacracy that's in the video game industry. He's a game publisher, and totally different culture in a small startup video game publisher than a law firm, and it works beautifully for both of them. So it's just so broad, and I love that.
We have an insurance agency. Talk about an old traditional company, insurance. And one thing I've noticed, especially organizations I talk to that have already adopted Holacracy, are having, in what I can only share anecdotally, an easier time dealing with the pandemic and then the necessary changes to the work because of the pandemic than companies that relied on a traditional management hierarchy. Because if you can't be in the same office with your boss or work with your boss, remote working and self-management pair beautifully together.
Yep, totally.
Yeah. So there was a quick question: can Holacracy work in education schools? Yes.
Yeah.
We have an entire network of Montessori schools that are using Holacracy, and I'm actually personally working with a junior college in Southern California that is adopting Holacracy for its entire administration.
And I love the example of the preschool run by Jen, who's now a Holacracy coach as well. She got so inspired with it, but she has a preschool. And what she found was they were trying to do a very different educational paradigm. They wanted children growing up not just with teachers as the authority figures that told them what to do, but to find their own sense of creativity and joy and power, right? So they realized they needed to change their organizational structure, because if they have teachers in an old paradigm management hierarchy, that's not really conducive of sending this different message of how they work with the children. And in their school, the teachers are more like guides. They get down there with the kids. They follow the kids' leadership of what they want to learn and grow and develop with some guidance. And so they adopted Holacracy in the preschool, and all their teachers are in this new paradigm now, so that it carries through to how they show up with the children. So that's a great example.
Yep. And in any instance, I've seen the kids always pick it up way faster than the grown-ups, because we're not trying to change what they're used to, not trying to change their habits. We're just fostering different habits to start.
Yeah.
Yep. So let's see here. This is an interesting one. How can you recognize if you're abusing the power of Holacracy practice, and how do you deal with misuse of power when you're self-organized?
Yeah, so I think one of the things to be careful of in that is it's easy to fall into a bit of a victim-y space around it. So just notice if you are, and invite yourself to pull out of it. And that's where it's like you're frustrated because somebody else isn't doing Holacracy right? It often shows up in the front lines. People will say, my boss, my manager, they're not doing Holacracy right. They're still trying to micromanage. Or the managers will show up saying, I'm trying, but no one's stepping up and taking power, or whatever. And so the first thing I'd say is notice if you're in that mode where it's like, you're feeling like it's somebody else's fault that you're not doing this right. Turn that around and find your own power in that, right? What can you do differently? So I'm coaching people who are complaining about their manager all the time and say, forget about the manager. You can affect this change. You don't need your manager's cooperation. You can simply, when the manager comes and tries to micromanage you or task you with something, ask them, what role are you asking for that in? And if there isn't a clear responsibility, say, that's not actually my accountability. maybe you want to bring this to governance and we can sort out, should this be my roles thing? And then I'll happily do it, right? So it doesn't require the manager. What's happening often there is the person is dropping their boundaries. They're just going with it. They're doing the old thing because it feels safe and comfortable, even though they're frustrated with the manager. Instead of saying, no, we made a decision here as a company. The company has changed. It is not that power structure anymore. And I have every right to push back on that. It doesn't have to be it's not like a rebellious pushback. It's just I don't think that's actually my role. Or, actually, I think this is my decision, not yours, because it is my role, or whatever. So turn it around. If you're frustrated about somebody else not doing it right, turn it around. What can you do? How can you do it more yourself? What can you own? Right? And maybe that means, how can you get a good coach involved if you don't know what else to do or whatever? But it's what can you do?
That's awesome, Brian. You've actually addressed, there was another question about motivation, about employees and not having them be complacent, that it works both ways. There was one last question here, which I think is just a yes. Would you agree that compassion and empathy are powerful traits? Yes.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yep. And then there was one question in the chat, which I want to start answering and then let you maybe add a couple things. It was, what books would you recommend? I would recommend reading Brian's book on Holacracy as a start. That's number one. Then he also referenced True Purpose by Tim Kelly, which I put in the chat. Great book. I've used it personally to discover my own personal purpose. We use it as Holacracy 1. I know Brian's used Tim's methods as well. Tim's great. The other one, Brian referenced victim energy, and some of that references back to Barry Oshry's work. I'm going to put that in the chat. Oshry, thank you. In a moment called he's written several books. The first of which is Seeing Systems, and super cool, fascinating read, and talks about victim energy and how that works culturally, societally. Brian, do you want to maybe give us 2 or 3 additional books?
You've already hit on several of the ones I mentioned. The one that I definitely recommend is Frederick Laloux's book, which is Evolving Organization. It really looks at the broader paradigm shift of how organizations are going through complete, the historical and then upcoming or the current leading edge of these massive paradigm shifts and how we think about organizing. And he writes about Holacracy, mentions it as well. It's not all about Holacracy, but he mentions it. Holacracy is an example of a framework for getting to the paradigm that he mostly writes about as kind of the leading edge. Teal in that language, they're color-coded. But it's a really wonderful book, and it's in some ways it's almost like a prequel to my book. It gives you the broader kind of frame of just big picture. How are organizations evolving? How are our paradigms of organization evolving? And what does the new paradigm look like? And then Holacracy gives you the concrete framework for actually enacting it. So another really, really good read.
Yep. And right at the beginning of the presentation where Reem mentioned that Coexist is working on teal practice, that's a direct reference to Frederick Laloux's color coding of organizations in reinventing organizations.
Yeah, reinventing organizations. Is that what I said?
Yeah,
yeah, reinventing organizations.
No, you did. And also, there's 2 versions of that. There's the first version is a very dense prose. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful read. Very, very dense. He also 2 years ago, I think now, came out with a beautiful illustrated version that I think is amazing. There are actually several organizations who use Holacracy practice who give a copy of Brian's book and a copy of the illustrated version of Reinventing Organizations. That's what you get on your first day. You don't get an orientation. You don't get, here's stuff with our logo on it. You get these 2 books. So I wrote the books in the chat. Someone can you write the books to us? The titles, I didn't get them all. I'm gonna ask the co-reachers to help us with that because they can communicate it to the participants. So I'll make sure the co-reachers have the full list. But I think we're almost at time. Reem, is there anything, we are so grateful to Co-Reach for bringing us in for this, and anything we can do to support you. Brian and I are both US based. We have partners all over the world, but really you are our partners at Co-Reach there in the Gulf countries, there in Saudi. anything else from you? I don't want to go over.
First of all, I want to start by saying that time have flied. I personally have enjoyed every second and every moment of this beautiful question and interview kind of webinar. I want to mention that it is a true bless that since we have started applying Holacracy, because it has not only shifted the way how we are working, but it really have shifted us as people and made us really more in control of what truly is within our control. It's not what we want to control others. It's been a true bless. And since I have met you, Rebecca and Brian, and we started even more closely with each other. We have elevated, we have shifted, we have speeded up. Things are really, we look forward. It is really easier for us now since the pandemic started and the lockdown. It's been easier for us to accommodate and adapt and work than if we were in a hierarchical system. I want to thank you from my heart because this has been wonderful. It's a journey. It has its ups and downs. We are learning until this day. We are learning, and up to another 3 years, we will continue learning because it's a continuation of evolving. So thank you so much for everything. And we want to just remind everyone about the poll that it will appear right now. It's a short poll with few questions.
Oh, yep,
it'll take only 1 minute. Yeah.
Answer the poll. Cool. Well, I think in that case, we'll leave the poll open. And yeah, thank you so much for having us, Reem. This was great. B, thanks as always. And if you have any questions, reach out to Reem at Coexist, reach out to us. We'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn and Facebook. And Reem and the other co-reachers are amazing. So we look forward to continuing the partnership as well. And for everyone else,
absolutely.
Ramadan Kareem, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for organizing this, Reem, and everyone at Coexist.
Most welcome. It's been a pleasure and honor. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.